Hey girl, what you gonna do tonight? I've got my mama's car keys and you've got a ticket to ride.
Hello, and welcome to Your Favorite Flick, a podcast where each episode we celebrate a movie that my guest loves. We aren't here to be critics, we're here to be fans. We're going from an excellent but obscure midweek movie to an excellent blockbuster today. Anne Sears is joining us for the first time. Anne, like so many of us, loves Die Hard. But beyond her appreciation of the action, the humor, and the Christmas of it all, she has done some serious thinking on it over the years. We get into complex character motivations, storytelling, and how Die Hard is subtly a feminist masterpiece. Enjoy. Anne Sears, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
What is so important about Die Hard to you?
Yeah, so Die Hard stands out to me because I think it is just a perfect action movie. And it's also a movie that is a lot of fun to watch, and I feel like that is something that is a really important part of watching an action movie is it should be fun. I think if you don't have that element of fun in it, it can become a little bit punishing. And Die Hard has always stood out to me as something that like hits all the elements of an action movie. It hits it really, really well, but is also a really good time.
100% agree. It does the action things well, and it finds the right notes dramatically and comedically well within that, which I think is such a challenge.
Right.
You were talking before we got started recording about having some nostalgia, but also a well-considered nostalgia, let me say, for the 80s action era. What do you find there in general that you really respond to?
Yeah, I feel like there were a lot of kind of standalone action movies getting made in the 80s and 90s. And they that took you on that kind of fun ride, like we were talking about with Die Hard. And as we've moved more into this century, my feeling has just been that when you look at those fun action set pieces and the things that do have a little bit of humor in them, they seem to have really been swallowed up by superhero movies, by MCU, or by existing IP being regurgitated. Oh, it's not that they're not making action movies, but I think of the last few times I've gone to the theater and to see action, it's been Top Gun Maverick, it's been the new Jurassic Park, or it's been a superhero movie. So it's like those have kind of sucked up everything, and there doesn't seem to be room left for some of these guy running around barefoot in a skyscraper shooting bad guys type thing. And so I just really appreciate some of those movies that were made during the 80s and 90s.
I'm right with you. I think part of the reason for that is budgets on these movies have to be high, right? To make
Yeah.
them, and everybody's nervous about taking that gamble on something that may not work. But that said, these gambles have paid off before, so I'd love to see them being willing to take those risks.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, my understanding with Die Hard is it was a little bit of a gamble too, particularly with the casting of Bruce Willis at the time. And that is one of the things that I really like about this movie. Obviously, you have to have a good hero in an action movie, right? And I think Bruce Willis is just fantastic in this, in the kind of everyman character. He's not what you were seeing at the time and what you still kind of see these guys that in the 80s and 90s you're looking at like Sylvester Stallone, you're looking at Arnold Schwarzenegger, these guys that clearly live in the gym. And nowadays you look at what these Marvel guys have to do to their bodies before they can be in a film, and it's just really refreshing, I think, to see like Bruce Willis's character is just a guy, and that's not only enough, but it's kind of part of what makes this movie so special.
I think that's a great point. I mean, like, certainly in shape, but not in ridiculous, unachievable shape as we
Yeah,
see
don't mean like
with Arnold.
for sure. And Bruce Willis, I'll go on record with my hot take. Bruce Willis, very, very handsome guy. No one's questioning that about him at all. But he also looks
I
like
don't know,
somebody,
and that's way out there. I might have to cut that from this episode.
it's a brave stance. I'm going to stand by it. Bruce Willis is handsome. So yeah, not to say that he's not a movie star, doesn't have movie star good looks, but he looks like you also wouldn't do a double take if you saw him like out in the wild, like I might do if I walked by someone that had the build of a Schwarzenegger or the Thor from the Marvel movies.
I hear you loud and clear on that. Believable as this New York cop taken out of his natural environment. And
Yeah.
what I was thinking about on my viewing today, To go along with what you're saying about looks, this is a very vulnerable character right from the beginning of the movie. Like, we meet him on the airplane and he's gripping the arm of the seat. I'm wondering if you find the same, and how does that inform how you watch him and watch the movie?
Yeah, I think he does have some vulnerability, and I think a lot of what this movie does is challenge some traditional views of masculinity, and I think they start doing that right off the bat with this is a guy that is okay having a conversation with a stranger about the fact that he's afraid of flying, and has numerous conversations with people about the circumstance, because the whole premise of this is he's a New York cop, his wife's gotten a job in LA. He's going to see the family for the holidays. You can tell that, like, none of the adults really know where this is going. It's all kind of up in the air. But he's talking to people about what's going on, and he's willing to admit, like, when Argyle, the limo driver, calls him out right away, like, "Oh, okay, well, you just couldn't get over yourself, or you thought she was gonna fail." He's able to take some of those and roll with it, while also still having some issues. He gets in a fight with Holly about her using her maiden name, which ends up being a big plot point. But I think that there's a lot of things about that that kind of go along with an everyman hero, and also go along with someone that's not invulnerable, or someone that's not a superhero.
Yeah, that's something that I think I was 11 with this when this movie came out. I certainly didn't get those themes consciously of kind of playing against regular masculine tropes there. Definitely have as I've gotten older, but I think like most great things in movies that gets to you. And if you're somebody who cares about movies and a viewer who pays attention, I think those things seep in even if you're not 100% aware of them.
Yes, absolutely. I think they're forming, because I'm about the same age as you, so we were in our formative years watching these things, and they do feed into your ideas of how men and women are supposed to react to one another, and what men and women are allowed to do and not allowed to do.
And you mentioned the maiden name. And I was thinking too of the guy on the plane telling him to like roll the carpet in his toes to
Yes.
get over the flight. There are so many things in this movie that set us up for later that on a first viewing we might not even notice that's happened to us, but that end up being major plot points as we go. Are there any of those that I gave away two of the big ones maybe, but are there any of those that jump out for you, or for either of those? How do they hit you?
Yeah, I definitely that's one of the things I think makes this movie not only an action movie, but a great action movie, is that you do get those setups, and then you have those payoffs down the road, and they tie into the story, and story has to bring a hero and a villain together to work. And so you've got a good story behind that, but then you also have some of these things that do come, and they pay out later with him. It's so iconic that Bruce Willis is like running around barefoot in this movie, and at one point, Hans, the villain, notices that and tells one of his fellow villains to shoot the glass. And so you've got Bruce Willis all bloodied up. And I think we might remember the barefoot bloody feet, but you don't always remember that that started from the very first conversation of the movie, of this guy telling him this is how you unwind when you've been stressed out. He's going into a bathroom at the office to freshen up after his flight, which he also takes off his shirt. So that gives us the wife beater that he wears through almost the entire movie until he ends up just completely shirtless. So I think those are a couple of good payoffs that have tie-ins to the plot. The maiden name is obviously a big one. He notices that when he's trying to look her up on at the time, what must have been an incredibly high-tech check-in system for a skyscraper lobby. We also see her name on the door of her office, and that's what everyone's calling. And that comes back because when Holly ends up having to interact with Hans Gruber, the big villain, one on one of the things at some point they get in McClane's name, they know who he is, and it's very important that she not be associated with him, because as it eventually happened, then he figures it out and he takes her hostage. But for a long time, she's able to kind of fly under the radar because she's been using her maiden name. This kind of symbol of the strife in their marriage was actually something that allowed her to function almost until the very end as her own kind of independent agent in all of this.
Yeah, absolutely. As a great compliment to what you were saying about shattering or at least bending our ideas of masculinity, we get such an independent Holly, who's the one who ends up being the advocate for the group. And
Mhm.
how much less interesting of a movie if she's the damsel in distress from the moment the kidnapping happens.
Totally. And that is one of the key things that stands out about her is that she is not a damsel in distress. She's arguably the most cool-headed and competent of all of the hostages. She doesn't back down in front of her husband, obviously, but she also doesn't back down from Han at the point where she has to go and talk to him about, can we get some concessions going for the pregnant woman that's here, and generally, like, you should take us to the bathroom if you are going to keep us here for a while. Hans is initially kind of dismissive of her, but she has maybe a little bit of her New York City grit, but she kind of snaps right back at him and gets his attention. You can see in Alan Rickman's performance, he like looks up and he's like, "Hang on a second." And she's savvy. She's doing the opposite of what Cocaine Harry is doing. She's like going in and actually finding the right tact to deal with this guy, not back down too much, but not come on too strong. And she ends up getting what she wants to get out of the situation. So yeah, she's not a damsel in distress, and I think that makes this movie so much more interesting. I also Another thing I really like about her, the way that this character is written, is the family stress that's there. The movie has Holly's side the entire time. Like at no point in time are you in doubt as to what's going on here. It is very clear that like wife had some things happen in her career. She's doing great, and husband cannot handle it because he cannot get over himself, because he cannot get over some of the gender norms. And he's trying, but he just keeps like tripping over himself. And at no point in time does the movie ever make any apologies for what she's doing. In fact, she is celebrated. Her coworkers are talking about how great she is. She's got the gold Rolex, which that's another payoff that comes in at the very end, actually. She's gotten this gold Rolex as a symbol of how well she's doing. Bruce Willis, he's trying, but he keeps stepping on himself. And there's a part of him that realizes that he's being an ass, but there's also a part of him that is struggling with kind of his pre-existing notions. And she's also a working mom that is never like demonized. No one's ever there's shots back and forth of her kids at home with the nanny, and no one ever makes any comments of, why did you break up a family? Why aren't you home with your kids or anything like that? This is a woman that's allowed to be really good at her job, and she's celebrated for that. And her husband needs to get on board with the situation.
It's so rare in guy movies of that era. Like there are some great movies like Working Girl and 9 to 5 that celebrate
Yeah,
women in a similar way. But in action movies, we just didn't see that.
for
What's
sure.
that?
And kind of, yeah, like we were talking about earlier, these things in formative years, especially for me as a woman that did like these kinds of things. I remember like going and talking with the boys at lunch after Knight Rider came out because none of the girls had watched it. And I wanted to like talk with the guys at lunch about Knight Rider and Dukes of Hazzard. I'd always been drawn to these sorts of movies, but there weren't a lot of female role models that you could see doing things that were just being like the guy. They're doing stuff and it's tough, but so many times you see the women just like cry at a man's shoulder or collapse into a puddle of tears afterwards, or just doing the like, "Oh no, what are we going to do?" And so like the characters, the female characters that don't do that really stuck out to me. Like the Princess Leia's, the Ripley's, women that are out there doing those things. And so I put Holly kind of in that category. She's a supporting character, but she's tough. She's someone to aspire to.
I like putting her on that Ripley continuum. Did an episode on Alien with my friend Laura, and one of my favorite performances of all time, her in those first two movies. And it's
Oh,
a good
I
point
know
that
him.
Bonnie Bedelia, go ahead.
I was gonna say that would have been on my list if I hadn't seen you'd already done it. I'm such a fan of that. I actually have an orange cat named Ripley. Like, huge fan of Sigourney Weaver's performance in that. So yeah, like those as a young girl, you can really latch onto those performances, and they can really mean a lot.
So when did you first see this, Anne?
So I don't have a memory of seeing it in the theater. I think because I probably would have been a little young to go see it in the theater. So it would have been high school, college. But I definitely remember by college I was a full on fan. I had a VHS tape of Die Hard. So I definitely watched it, and I've continued to watch it. And it's not only one of my favorite action movies, but it's my favorite Christmas movie. So we can have a whole conversation about the Christmas of it all when it comes to Die Hard as well. So maybe not every year for Christmas, but a lot of years I'll revisit it over the holidays as well.
let's take on the Christmas movie thing because, of course, this is
Let's do it.
famously a debate. I will tell you, spoilers. I come down very much on your side of it.
Okay.
But besides the obvious of it takes place at Christmas time, why is this a Christmas movie?
So I think it's a Christmas movie for one thing because Christmas is essential to this plot. We learn that these terrorists are actually not terrorists, they're just common thieves, as Holly calls them at the end of the movie. But they're just this is a heist movie, right? A heist movie pretending to be a terrorist movie. And one of the things the terrorists need is to blow up the roof with a bunch of dead people that are going to be sorted through for a while so that the authorities don't know that the bad guys actually got away. So they need this to be happening after hours when there's a Christmas party. Similarly, we don't have Bruce Willis coming to Nakatomi Tower, except for the fact that there is a Christmas party going on, and that's what's going on in his relationship. So, but for Christmas, this movie, this plot cannot happen. And I also think, like you said, there's a lot of Christmas stuff that's featured. Right away, we're hearing jingle bells being whistled by people. We're hearing Run DMC, Christmas in Hollis. That's the funny little moment between Bruce Willis and Argyle. Like, you got any Christmas music? And he's like, yeah, this is Christmas music. We've got just kind of references to "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." You've got people saying "Merry Christmas," like the flight attendant. You've got bad decisions being made at the holiday office party. I feel like that's always a sign of a good Christmas party. And at the end, after all the big action set pieces have happened, and there's this paper. I was on rewatch. I was trying to figure out if the paper was supposed to be the bonds that they were stealing or if it was just office paper. But anyway, this paper's falling down and it looks like snow, and then they close this out on Let It Snow. So I think it's definitely referencing Christmas a lot. And then I think another thing that Christmas movies have is some sort of reconciliation. And this movie has a family reconciliation. You have a guy that got in a fight with his wife and can't get over himself, and they are coming together at the end. What's the greatest gift of all? It's family. And on a sillier note, there's also the reconciliation of Sergeant Al and his service firearm. He finally, at this moment, is able to fire off his gun again. So the cop is reunited with his weapon.
Oh, I love that framing. That is, look, I'm a person who's prone to big statements sometimes. That is one of my favorite shots ever. The shot where we see the gun, it's close up on the gun, we're kind of looking up, and then they deepen the focus of the shot, and we see that it's Al behind it. It's
Yeah.
just such a triumphant moment. While still showing his, like, he doesn't look triumphant, he looks nervous, but it
Yeah.
shows he was able to do it. He was able to pull his gun again when it was right to do it.
Yeah, and it also gives Al a hero moment because he's been Bruce Willis's avatar in the real world most of the time, and he's not a part of the action. If anything, people are trying to shoo him out of the way, even though he is. The movie signals to us that he is one of the people that is kind of like Holly, is figuring out what's really going on before the leadership that's there, the LAPD or the FBI. You hear a couple times Al muttering under his breath, "Well, this is going to happen next, or this is going to happen next." So even though the movie is portraying him as someone that knows what time it is, he's essentially sidelined in terms of the action until the very end, where he has this kind of final heroic moment, which I also really love because Carl coming back is that's almost like a horror coded scene. It's like the villain comes back one last time. You thought you were safe, and so
Absolutely.
that's also a fun thing to just have this guy that was always kind of a loose cannon. He just comes like raging out, and no one, including our hero, is expecting it. And then you got your guy Al ready when it's important to do what matters.
Um, But I think because I've been in that horror, mindset, just rewatched Texas Chainsaw for an
Agree.
episode, it really did strike me that especially with him shrugging off that blanket that looks like a cloak, really, I mean, it makes him
Yeah.
look like a classic horror villain in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a
Um,
very fun moment. And I do think this movie, one of the speaking of the villain, it does set up these villains as being scary. And I think that that is something that although the movie has humor and it has some lightheartedness, I think for a successful action movie, you have to feel like there are some stakes. You have to feel some tension. You have to feel some fear. I love another shot from the movie that I really like is in the beginning, there's a shot of the van that's going to come down into the garage, driving side by side with the car that's going to pull up into the lobby and take out security. And just the way that shot and the timing of it, and you see the van sinking down as the cars, that immediately signals to you these guys have plans on plans on plans. They are super organized. That in of itself gets you a little bit nervous. And then you see the two guys go in and they've got their whole like talking about basketball stick, and then they just shoot the security guard in the head. And so the movie's communicating to us right away these guys are organized and these guys are deadly. They will not hesitate to shoot anyone that gets in their way, even the tiniest little bit. And so I think having someone like Carl come back at the end, who was kind of always coded as a loose cannon, show up and have it be another moment of being scary, I think is part of what makes the movie work.
And of course, the one because of the death of his brother, who directly wants to kill John McClane, like who
Mhm.
would, that even though the situation's over, he has nothing to gain from it, in terms of bearer bonds or anything. Like he
Yeah.
just wants to kill McClane at that point.
Yeah, he's running on pure vengeance at that point in time.
Absolutely. Mention that opening action scene, but for my money, John McTiernan's about as good a director of action as there is. And one thing I love here that I think is so hard to pull off in this sort of setting is how much we understand the geometry of what's going on in this complex space of the office building.
Yeah.
Assuming you agree, how does that help us? How does that help pull us into the movie?
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with you, and I think that the tower is a great set piece for this movie, and I think it's one of the things that makes it stand out. Because in some ways it's a little bit heist, it's also a little bit kidnapping, and also a little home invasion-y kind of feeling. And I think the setting of it all being in the one tower is part of it. And to your point, they are feeding you some clues about what's going on logistically on the side of the criminals, and then they're moving you from an action standpoint through a lot of parts of this building. This is an unfinished building, so we have some things going on in this beautiful lobby with the fountain and everything that's just completely destroyed at the end in a way that kind of made me think about like the T-Rex at the end of Jurassic Park in the lobby. Just like that lobby just looks about as destroyed as the lobby at Jurassic Park. You've got these completely unfinished parts of the building that just look like construction zones. And so we're in that for a part of it. You've got parts of the building that obviously had been finished out, but no one's there because it's Christmas Eve. And so there's some action taking place in those parts of the movie. So I think, yeah, it does, it moves you through all of those, but the storytelling and the direction, you never feel unmoored. You never feel confused or any more so than they want you to kind of be like following, picking up the breadcrumbs as they're leaving them for you.
But yeah, disoriented at times, but it feels like when we're disoriented that they want us to be disoriented.
Exactly. Exactly.
Was thinking of things that, and I don't know that I've ever thought of this way. One thing I should say, kind of an aside, and one thing I love about doing this podcast, and very intentionally, is it makes me watch movies with a fresh set of eyes because,
Yeah.
I've seen Die Hard a million times, and it's like, all right, if I'm watching it for the show, I have to really think about and engage with this, not just kind of have it on. And when we were talking about the setup, it occurs to me that we actually first see him talking to himself in situations that have nothing to do with the crisis. Like we see it after he talks to Holly. He's kind of admonishing himself. So another thing that they set up great so that he's believable, I think, is somebody once in crisis that he would continue this. This is part of his default, this kind of talking
Right.
himself through situations. I guess it's effectively narration, even though it's not voiceover narration. How does that play for you, and how does it play for the character?
Yeah, I think it works with the character. Like you said, they set it up in advance. Some of his sort of like stupid, stupid, stupid moment after he talks to Holly. And so we have that already in play for parts of the movie before he actually gets the walkie talkie and can talk to Al. Because if there's no Al and if there's no kind of externalizing his internal monologue, we've just got Bruce Willis running around quietly, which not to say that it would be bad, but there's a lot more if he's given, especially given this guy's comedic timing and wit, if he's allowed an opportunity to speak. And so I think you've got before he gets the walkie talkie where he can talk to Al, you've got to have some mechanism to let Bruce Willis talk and let him make us care about the character. Because you can have a hero and a villain, but if we don't care about them, we're not going to care what happens in the movie. We're not gonna be worried about our hero. So yeah, I think doing that was a clever storytelling way to work in some
And
of
I
that.
think, yeah, I think voiceover narration might kill this movie because it would sound too removed. So it gives a
Absolutely.
mechanism to allow for exactly what you're talking about.
Right, right. And I think the best movies, it's kind of almost a show don't tell version of it. You don't give me a voiceover. Find a way for your movie to communicate it to me otherwise.
So let's talk Alan Rickman. This is amazingly his first ever screen performance. I
Yeah,
mean,
he was
I'm
a
just going to throw it
Pinkerton.
over to you, Anne, and say Alan Rickman. What are your thoughts?
Alan Rickman. Oh my gosh. I mean, love, love, love Alan Rickman. He just so talented. And I think, like I said, for an action movie to work, you need your hero and you need your villain, and they have to be ones that you care about. And Alan Rickman's character, he's one of those villains that you almost like him. He's got a little bit of charisma going. He's obviously very smart, but you don't like him because he is ruthless. But I think Alan Rickman's performance is just so perfect and I think one of the things that works about McClane versus Gruber is there's a contrast, not just a good guy, bad guy, but there's a contrast of the everyman. And then Gruber, Alan Rickman's character, he's a well educated, fancy guy. He's got fancy suits. He's quoting things he learned in his finishing school or whatever. And so the movie is constantly contrasting Bruce Willis, who is, like we talked about, he's like an every guy, and he's getting through this situation based on some street smarts and his experience as a cop. And then you've got Alan Rickman, who has just honestly, you really kind of a study in hubris. This bad guy that just kind of believes that there's no way any of these jokers could possibly get in the way of his. He's thought of everything, and I think Alan Rickman just brings such a great performance. There's like some little moments when he's talking, explaining to them that he just killed the head of the company. And he's just sitting there like eating their Christmas snacks and very blasé explaining to them about how this guy's dead now. And just the way that he carries himself in such a refined way, but he is also a ruthless criminal that will shoot someone in the head, as a couple of people found out in this movie. So I just think he is, without the casting of those two, I don't know that this movie really works. The cat and mouse that they have going the whole time kind of culminates in that moment where Alan Rickman is doing his I'm an English guy playing a German who's doing an American accent moment that he has with Bruce Willis when they're both kind of, he knows who McClane is, but he's not sure if McClane knows who he is. And then he thinks, yeah, he definitely doesn't. And you have that great moment where Gruber fires the gun and Bruce Willis just like, oops, no bullets. That one always gets a laugh out of me. So I think not only is Alan Rickman great in this performance, but I think the way that he is able to play that elegant, refined, I think I'm better than everyone else, and the way Bruce Willis's kind of blue collar character, the way they come into conflict, and arguably some of Gruber's hubris becomes his downfall is just really satisfying to watch.
Yeah, that's a great point about hubris and it becoming his downfall. There is, I think, not in terms of good guy, bad guy, but I think there's a pretty easy way to read this movie that kind of in classical terms, Gruber is the protagonist and that he's the one like making everything happen. I'll go back to the Greeks. The classic Greek tragedy was hubris causing your downfall. And I yeah, movies are always better when the bad guy has real motivation. And in this one, motivation and action galore for him.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's a good point because you have your protagonist and antagonist, and Bruce Willis is just a fly in his ointment the whole time. He's got his plan, and Bruce Willis, this guy that almost like a mouse scurrying around in the walls, and you can't find him. He's just constantly making things difficult in a way that Rickman's performance keeps it very cool most of the time, but you can tell he's getting frustrated and then to the point when at the very end when they're trying to get into the vault or get the bonds out of the vault, and Holly calls him a common thief. And that's when Rickman just finally loses it, is when he's called a common thief and I'm an exceptional thief. That's just such a great a great line delivery from him. So yeah, I think that's an interesting way to think about the classical sense of these characters.
This is going a lot back a little bit to what we were talking about, but you mentioned the fly in the ointment. It made me think about this. I don't know for sure if this is true, but it is oft repeated that The Rock has a rule that he can never lose a fight in a movie, and like
Wow.
some say can't even be shown losing a fight, much less lose. And here we see such a contrast to this. Like John's coming up with
Yeah.
clever stuff, but he's losing a lot, and he's beat to hell.
Oh,
I
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, he definitely took several ass kickings. Well, I was thinking on this watch, like props to the costume department for all those undershirts that they're not shooting this in sequence. So they had to have like 37 versions of that undershirt in just various states of disarray. Cause yeah, he gets there's all kinds of fights that happen and he takes a lot of lickings. He gets very, very bloodied up in this.
Yeah, absolutely, and it goes back to that vulnerability we talked about. I also think there's great appeal to me, maybe as somebody who knows I'm a little smarter than I am tougher, not tough, not to say that I'm either, but a little smarter than I am tough, that
Yeah.
John is really more clever or smart than he is a tough guy.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and we see some of his ingenuity. Like the guy's crafty. The gun taped to his back is one instance. You see, there's a scene before that final showdown between him and Gruber, and he ends up dropping his gun, and everyone but McClane thinks, "Oh, there we go, it's over." But he'd taken some Christmas packaging tape and strapped a gun to his back for that very moment. And you see him figuring out the building, figuring out things to do in the building, wedging axes between elevator doors, using the string on his gun to drop into air shafts. You see him being someone that sees and can identify C4 and identify rocket launchers and missiles and stuff like that. So and therefore put some things together. So yeah, he's not all brawn and no brains by any stretch of the imagination. He's clever and he can think quickly on his feet. And I think he has to be. Otherwise, there's no way he would be a match for Hans Gruber.
Absolutely. On the flip side, not Gruber's certainly intelligent. I mean, he's come up with this whole plan. I did look this up because I thought it was the case, but I'm not enough of a Greek scholar to have known this for sure. He actually seriously misquotes Plutarch, not just in what he says about Alexander, but he actually
Oh,
gets the meaning completely wrong. The meaning is that it's he says something about infinite worlds, and essentially Alexander saying that as much as I've done, I can't possibly accomplish anything that means anything in the biggest picture. And
okay.
Gruber
Interesting.
basically reverses that and says like, "Oh, I've done everything. There's nothing left for me to conquer."
Yeah,
I
that's the only occasion for any kind of sadness is if I've conquered everything. And that's interesting, and I think that that fits with his character that he would misremember something like that, that he would for as much as he has that education and training, he is someone that you can go to all the finest schools in the world and still sometimes miss the point of the story that you're learning. And that's something that it seems like it fits with his character that he would have misinterpreted that.
and goes to that hubris again, right? That he's going to interpret it in a way that puffs himself up as opposed
Right.
to a reading that is despairing.
Despairing will require some humility on your part. You know,
Yes.
there's no humility in this character whatsoever.
No, no, quite the opposite. No, it's interesting, and maybe there's something in the text that's absolute on this that I have not caught, but I always think of him as being German pretending to be English, and I've wondered how much of this, like, Oxford or Oxbridge, whatever, type
Mm.
education is real and how much of that is the put on as well.
Yeah, there's some conversation about that. And one thing I heard, I did not come up with this myself, but tracks for me is that he's like a German that was educated in England. And so he has a German accent, but it's not as pronounced because of the fact that he maybe went to Oxford and studied. So and that also fits in with the kind of you came from a kind of family that was able to do that for you, send you off to be educated abroad at a really fine prestigious institution. And so that's the Hans Gruber in my head is someone that His German accent is softened a little bit by time studying in England.
That absolutely makes sense to me, and maybe this is overreading it, but I would even say what is consistent with that for me is perhaps being a little bit of a pretender to this kind of English aristocratic mindset.
Yeah.
He's putting it on like he's got the line about the Savile Row Taylor Early, where it says, "I have two suits from them." And it just feels a
Yeah.
little bit like he's got to puff more than a little bit, maybe like he's got to puff himself up that much more. He doesn't have the more so there's nothing subtle there, she said, but like doesn't have the more subtle confidence you might get of somebody really born to that world.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, because it's not the stealth wealth kind of guy. This is someone that is afraid that you won't know that he is fancy unless he points out some ways that he's fancy to you.
So you mentioned the basketball game they're talking about when they go in early, and it's very key. It's not just a basketball game; it's a Lakers game, of course.
Yes,
And
because we're in
talking
LA.
about the classic Showtime Lakers with Worthy and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, I'm fascinated by how much this is not just an LA movie, but it's an LA through a New Yorker's eye movie. And was hoping for your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. We see some of that in Bruce Willis's character, McClane. I think as early as the airport is kind of given some like California, and there's like a couple of times where he sees something that is just maybe a little too bubbly and festive or a little too bright or what have you, and he's just like California. You can tell this is a guy that like, yep, this is everything I always thought that this place would be in the East Coast West Coast rivalry kind of world. And so, yeah, I think that's part of the fish out of water for Bruce Willis. He's a fish out of water in that he is coming from the gritty streets of New York to the gleaming palm trees of LA. In addition to being a fish out of water, we talked some about the contrast between Hans and McClane as fancy and blue collar, but there's also that contrast with his world and his wife's new world. His wife's new world is there's a string quartet in the office playing Christmas music, and there's the fancy terminal that he has to log into, which is signaling that she's using her maiden name, but also signaling like this is a fancy high tech place. They don't have check in panels like that at NYPD. I'm pretty sure, And there's even a shot of him like taking one of the drinks that it looks like some red wine, and he has one sip of it, and he's like, no thanks. He's definitely a New York City cop come to this LA world that is, it's got a little bit of Hollywood to it, and it's also got a little bit of posh to it. And he's, I think, feeling a bit out of place, but you also see how the movie allows his skills from that gritty world that he comes from to help him navigate and infiltrate this one.
Yeah, I think not incidental. John McTiernan was born in upstate New York, but was a New York City guy. Was educated
Okay.
at Juilliard, and I have a feeling we're getting some of his viewpoint as an East Coaster who
Yeah.
headed to the West Coast, seeping in there as well.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. We talked about it a little bit earlier too. I do think Holly still has a little bit. Bear in mind, she's presumably someone that grew up out there and just moved to LA for the job. And so while she doesn't like, I don't think really have the accent that Bruce Willis's character has, a touch of New York accent to him. But when she goes in and speaks to Gruber, and I feel like some of her toughness is like, this is maybe a Brooklyn girl or something like that, that is a little bit more gritty than maybe someone that grew up in LA and how they would go talk to Gruber.
Well, and we get the contrast with her coworker with the Hans Booby.
Oh my gosh,
That he
Cocaine
goes in
Harry.
with.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, which is also another great secondary performance. We've talked about Holly and Al, but I do think this guy doesn't have as much to do, but really great performance. This just smarmy business guy that is like coked up and being a little inappropriate with the women in his office on the holiday Christmas party. Like we all know this guy. And this is another hubris, right? This all of this stuff gets him shot right in the head because he thinks he can just waltz in and hey, this is what I do for a living. I do these kinds of deals for lunch, whole type vibe. And another great Alan Rickman moment is when Cocaine Harry and Gruber are facing up against each other. And Alan Rickman's just giving him a few minutes to just go and pretend like he's really impressed. Like, oh, you're amazing. And I think that is something that only Alan Rickman could really nail the way that they nailed it in that. So, yeah. R.I.P. Cocaine Harry.
I do love, that they walk in on him doing coke and it's his boss, and it's like, yeah, okay, it's what this guy does.
Yeah, I mean, it was the '80s, so I guess that was a little bit more normal, but he also he, like, does a bump before he goes in to talk to Gruber. I'm just like, "Wow, my dude. Like, maybe you need to be a little more clear-headed before you go talk to this guy."
Now, I'm going to admit something that I now feel like an utter idiot about, and I love heist movies. I have never thought of this as a heist movie before. I think because it's the bad guys doing the heist, and I so much
Yeah.
have it in my head that but it goes a little bit back to what I was saying about the protagonist antagonist.
Mhm.
Interesting divide in this movie is we're so used to our heroes being the heisters, anti-heroes, I guess. That
Yeah,
in
to
this
get
one we
or
actually
choose the
have a
woman or whatever.
right. Here we actually have the criminals performing the heist, which probably makes more sense in the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, but it does challenge a little of how we think about criminals. Our heist movies where the good guys are doing the heisting are usually these more sophisticated heists that take a lot of planning, right? And so we like to think of our good guys as being capable of doing things like that. And we maybe like to think about our bad guys as just stumbling into a bank with a gun and no real plan. And this kind of subverts that. We have these criminals that are incredibly sophisticated. As you said, with Theo, technologically, computer sophisticated. And you've got Alan Rickman's character, Hans, who has thought through everything. These guys have done their research on not only the building, the target, but how law enforcement is going to respond to that and how they actually need that to happen. Like they need the FBI to cut the power in order to get through the fourth or the final lock in the safe. So it is a complex heist and they have really thought it out. And if it weren't for that pesky cop, they would have gotten away with it.
It's like a Scooby Doo episode that way.
Exactly. Pesky cop. And give a little credit to Argyle in the garage. Finally, we it takes a while, but we do get a payout for Argyle being stuck in the garage the whole time, having a little party in a limo and being really slow to find out that something's going on, but he does end up taking out the ambulance and stopping the getaway ambulance. So he gets his flowers too.
This movie, I think, is very aware that it's a movie. Like, we get the line from Argyle about the music's gonna rise and you're gonna kiss her, and of course, we talk very directly in movie language, and that happens. We get the line about the captain that to me is so clearly a reference to other action movies. And I'd further say that plays into the Christmas element for me, because I feel like Christmas movies often know their movies, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think about the very closing scene where you see John and Holly kissing in a back of a car, and that is just like how many classic Hollywood movies have that kind of shot. That's something that at the time was a throwback to an earlier era. So yeah, I think the movie does know that it's a movie, and I won't say that it's not taking itself seriously because I think it is. I think it's a movie trying to make a good movie, but it is also a movie that's aware of its kind of history in the context of movies overall.
Yeah, it manages a wink at it without taking you out of the movie, which is such a thin line to walk. Like, there's so much
Yeah,
risk, I think, when you do that.
it's a real magic trick to be able to pull those things off, but when you do, they are so satisfying because it's as a viewer, it's such a comfortable place to sit because you feel kind of like you're being taken care of by this piece of art that you're watching, you know?
Yeah, very well said. And I'm thinking on what you said about the kiss in the back of the car, "Murder My Sweet," which I mentioned earlier, which is from the 40s, ends exactly that way. It's Marlowe and the client having a kiss in the back of the car. So you're right, that absolutely is playing on classic Hollywood tropes. You already mentioned the horror connection of the villain reveal. Like,
Yeah.
they're having fun with these tropes. The obnoxious way I hear this described, but I do like sometimes, is it's in conversation with movies of the past.
There you go. Yes. We can go with that for all the high-minded podcasts out there. But yeah, another thing, speaking, we haven't talked about one-liners yet in this movie, which is also kind of a little bit of a trope, but has some really good one-liners. I think the best of all being "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker." Hopefully, we can curse on your show.
Brad Kaufman's been on twice. I would have had to cut his episodes down to like a minute and a half.
So, yeah, we've got the "Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker," which is, I think, the one that everybody thinks about. But there's also this when I was watching this with my husband, he's seen it before, but not nearly as many times as me, and so when Alan Rickman another great Alan Rickman delivery, when he sends the dead guy down and he's written on his shirt, he sends him down in the elevator and it says, "Now I have a machine gun," and he pulls down a little bit and it says, "Ho, ho, ho." This that got a LOL from my husband on this watching, and I think it's the combination of the writing and Alan Rickman's performance delivering this is very delivering dry delivery of that line. It's got some good one-liners in it. I also like when he's on the emergency line on the walkie-talkie, and whoever's running the dispatch is like, "Sir, this is for emergencies only." And he's like, "No shit, lady. Do I sound like I'm ordering a fucking pizza here?" So yeah, I think action movies need good one-liners, and this one definitely has it.
And one of the strengths, obviously, of ending up with Bruce Willis after a long process where he was certainly not their first choice,
Oh my
is
goodness.
they did some serious rewriting beforehand and on set in realizing what they had in him as a comic voice. Yes. One thing we like to do is leave people with a couple of other movies to check out. What are other movies that Die Hard makes you think of? What would you recommend to fans of Die Hard?
Yeah, so I think one movie that I would recommend is The Rock. 1996 is The Rock. It's got Sean Connery and Nick Cage. So you've got a law enforcement agent. Nick Cage is a little more of a derpy law enforcement agent. He's nowhere near as slick as Bruce Willis's character, but you've still got this like fish out of water, drawn into some action that you're over your head in. And it's got a good story. It's got some villains that are very well organized. They're very scary. And you've got a very unique set piece in Alcatraz. And so I think like Nakatomi Tower is a unique set piece. You've got Alcatraz. And so, and it's fun. It's fun and it's got a lot of action. I would also recommend Speed. I think Speed, you've got Sandra Bullock and Keanu Reeves doing a couple of really great performances. So if you like having a couple actors that can really hold down a movie, where you spend a lot of time in a bus and that sounds like it would be boring, but it's actually not. And you've got another cop. This is an LA cop finding himself in the middle of a bad guy's kidnapping revenge situation. And it's also a lot of fun. It has humor. And then if you would like something from this century, I would recommend Edge of Tomorrow, aka Live Die Repeat, the Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt movie, which this one walks up to a little more sci-fi action hybrid, but I don't think the time travel stuff is you don't have to think about it too hard. And it's got some amazing, amazing action. And then you've again got Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt are very humorous in their performances and they play great off of one another. And so I think another movie that you don't feel like things are happening for action's sake. There's a really, really good story anchoring it and some really good performances. But you know, with all three of these, I'm a big proponent. Like these movies should be fun, and so I think all three of those movies are a lot of fun and going to give you a lot of what you liked about Die Hard.
Great recommendations all. When I saw The Rock when it came out in theaters, I remember going home and calling our friend Brad Kaufman and saying it's the best action movie since Top Gun, which made it was unfairly discounting Die Hard in there. I just loved it that much. It hit hard. I went with a couple of relatively more recent ones and really just thought about these as we were talking. One that comes to mind is Mad Max Fury Road.
Yeah.
Uh, Different movie in a lot of ways, but that same kind of sustained action that, like, once it gets going about 30 minutes into the movie, it's all this chase. And it's not that every moment's action, but it's all tension broken by action and then more tension. So I just feel
Warm.
similar. Not as much humor as this, though there are really more funny performances, I would say, than like killer one-liners, but definitely still a sense of play about it. Um,
Yeah.
and then another one that I think is an underseen movie is Dread. Not Judge Dredd, the Stallone one, but the more recent Dread starring Carl Urban. It same character, but
I don't think
truer.
I've seen that one actually. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, it reminds me because he is clearing an office building there's a little bit of a Warriors feel to it too, of like there's kind of these
Okay.
different gangs, or it's a residential building in that case, but it also uses the verticality and the structure of a building in very inventive and in very cool ways. It also has less funny than this, but has a sense of fun and adventure about it.
Nice. I'll have to check that last one out. I haven't seen that before, so that's exciting. I have something new to watch.
Yeah, fun popcorn watch for sure.
Yeah.
All right, and well, thank you so much for doing this today. It's so nice to meet you. I love when I get people on the show for the first time and just get to dive into a movie.
Yeah, thank you so much. This has been so much fun. I have lots of opinions and I'm always delighted to have an opportunity to talk about them. So this is great. This is a really good time.
Terrific.
All right. Thanks, Brad. Goodbye.
Bye. Hello, and welcome to Your Favorite Flick, a podcast where each episode we celebrate a movie that my guest loves. We aren't here to be critics, we're here to be fans. We're going from an excellent but obscure midweek movie to an excellent blockbuster today. Anne Sears is joining us for the first time. Anne, like so many of us, loves Die Hard. But beyond her appreciation of the action, the humor, and the Christmas of it all, she has done some serious thinking on it over the years. We get into complex character motivations, storytelling, and how Die Hard is subtly a feminist masterpiece. Enjoy. That's it for this one, folks. I'm Brad Glazer. I host, produce, and edit the show. Special thanks to Brad and Crystal Kaufman for connecting me and Anne. Julia Mott wisely continues to use her own last name. The music you hear at the beginning of the show and now is by my friend Richard Bates and his band, The Huns. That's H-O-N-S. You can find The Huns' music on Bandcamp. On Wednesday, we keep the action going with Ford v Ferrari. Bill Pelche, who happens to be Anne's husband, joins us and uses his experience as a driver to look at the movie through a different lens. Elephant in the room. Bill is good on that episode and all, and I'm sure you'll enjoy it. But having listened to this one, you won't be surprised to learn that he's not as good as Anne. The truth must be told here. Please follow, rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, all the things. Those reviews in particular, no matter how long or short, really help us reach more people. You can follow us on Instagram at YourFavoriteFlick, on Letterboxd at Favorite. Shoot us an email at yourfavoriteflick@gmail.com. Huns, take us out.
Same days brushing up on poetics. That's 14 times 365 inflection.